Hi everyone, welcome to this masterclass called Make Your Child's Writing Stand Out. Before we begin, I'd just like to introduce myself and also what I do. My name is Claudine Fernandez and I'm the founder of Artistic Strategies Academy. ASA is basically an English writing school based in Singapore, and we groom young writers to become more proficient, to become more confident, and to become more competent in terms of their communication skills. And we do this through very creative and artistic methods. So, just a bit of background about why I started ASA. Basically, I've been a teacher for about maybe 15 years now. And throughout my career, I've met many students who are very, very intelligent, and many of them are also very creative and talented, but they just find writing very, very challenging, or they just dislike it very much. So I decided to start a school where children will not only have fun learning and enjoy writing, but they will also be able to learn and improve their English language skills. So this webinar is part of my offerings to help children to stand out in their writing skills. Many times when they are taught writing in school or elsewhere, they are taught a very standard and formulaic way of writing. And as a result, you might find that all children start to sound the same, or their writing becomes very dull and boring and not engaging enough. So why is this important? Why is it important for your child's writing to stand out? Well, if we look at the PSLE in Singapore, which is, the national examination, PSLE markers are interested in original and creative pieces that answer the question. So that's one very practical reason why your child's writing should stand out. But if we look at the long term, and if we look at writing as a life skill, we would want, people who read our writing to feel engaged, and we would want them to feel interested. We would want our message to come across very clearly and persuasively. So the only way to do so is to make our writing stand out from the crowd. And today I will be offering a few suggestions, very, very simple suggestions that you can implement right away, and your children can start to implement right away in their writing, whether it is something that they are writing for fun or whether it is for a school assignment. Okay, so let's begin. Now, you may have heard this term. Let me just shift my face so you can see the words. You may have heard this term called a hook when it comes to writing. So what exactly is a hook? A hook is something that will capture the reader's attention right from the start. So it draws them into whatever is being written, and it prompts them to read further. So especially at the introduction, it is very, very important to hook or to captivate your audiences, right? And the way to do this, there are several ways to do this. So it is basically to paint a memorable picture such that they can see it clearly in their minds. Okay, so some of the ways that you can try to create a captivating hook would be through things like flashbacks or using a quote. It could be a quote by the character, or it could also be a quote by a famous person, right? And it has to be relevant to the topic or whatever it is that your child is writing. Another way to captivate your audience is to create a scene. So these are just some of the ways that we teach our kids at ASA to hook their readers in so that their readers would be interested from the start. So I'm going to show you two examples of this, and then you can see what I mean. So this particular piece was actually written by an 8-year-old girl, and she entered a competition, a writing competition, and she actually won a prize, second prize for it. So she was writing about going to the hawker center with a parent and, enjoying the food and coming across an old lady who was selling tissue paper. And her character in the story had a lot of compassion for the old lady at the hawker center. So this is how she began her story. "Darling, what would you like when we get to the hawker center?" my father asked. There is a lot to choose from. Thinking about the lovely fruit scents with their colors that look like the rainbow always brighten me up. And the strong smell of hor-fun just made my mouth water. I could not wait to get there. The tweeting of birds and the people chattering were typical of a Saturday afternoon in a Singaporean heartland. I was in the car with my father going to my favorite hawker center. So, if you were to read something like this from the start, this will already capture your attention because she employs many, many different techniques, right? She starts with a quote and then she describes the scene in the hawker center. And when she describes the scene in the hawker center, you would notice that she makes a lot of reference to things that can be picked up by the five senses. So, why don't you try and identify what are the kinds of imagery that she uses here that can be picked up by the five senses or some of the senses? There is the lovely fruit sense, so engaging the sense of smell, looking like a rainbow, engaging the sense of sight. Again, the smell of hor fun, which is a local dish. And then the tweeting of birds, people chattering, which engages the sense of hearing. So after that, she introduces where they are exactly. So instead of saying that, oh, we were at a hawker center, she presents the scene of the hawker center to create a memorable picture in the minds of the audience. So I hope you realize the importance of having a very strong hook at the start or the introduction of whatever you are writing. Now, when you are writing an introduction, one thing to bear in mind is that an introduction is something like a movie trailer. So when you go to the cinema and you watch a movie trailer, you don't get to see what happens in the entire story, right? But what the movie trailer does very successfully is that it gives you the juicy or the most exciting part of the story so that you will be tempted to watch the movie when it comes out. So similarly, an introduction functions in the same way where you are enticed to read the rest of the story. I hope that this helps when you are writing introductions. So, if you are ready, let's move on to the second tip. This is somewhat related to, writing a hook or a captivating hook. Okay, and it is the use of descriptive language. So, how do we define descriptive language? Basically, it is language used to describe things, places, people, and how do we do this? So, there are a few ways to do this as well, and the two ways that I want to talk about today is the use of sensorial imagery, which we saw a bit of in the example that I had given you earlier, and that is to engage the senses. So, how would something look like? How would something feel like? How would something taste like? Or even sound and smell like, right? When you are describing a particular place or anything that you want to describe to your audience. And the second way could be the use of adjectives. So, as we all know, adjectives are descriptive words, and adjectives again can be used to describe things, places, people, anything that is a noun, right? So, where do we use descriptive language? So, if we're talking about a composition or if we're talking about a story, you can actually use descriptive language throughout the story or throughout the composition, right? And one of the ways to use description is to use it when you're describing a place. So, like for example, the hawker center, or if the story is set in a school, then you can use descriptive language to describe the school or where exactly in the school the story is taking place. Now, the other way to use descriptive language would be when you are describing your characters. So, this is very important because many times when we write stories or even when we read stories, if we cannot identify with the character, if we cannot connect with the character, then the audience is lost. We don't want to read or we cannot sympathize with the character or what the character is going through. So, we must give our audience a good description of the character. Let me demonstrate how to use descriptive language in both of these instances. So if we look at this setting, I'm sure some of you would be familiar with this setting, right? It is a very famous place. So where is this? I think the billboards and the yellow cabs give it away, right? It is Times Square in New York City. So if you were to describe Times Square, there are two ways to do it. Okay, I'm going to show you both these ways and then you can decide which one sounds better or which one will make your writing stand out more. Okay, let's look at the first option. So the first option Let me just read it and get my face out of the way. This place is a very bustling city. There are many cars on the road. It is well lit, and the lights are coming from the billboard posters around the street. Though it is late, there are still many people crossing the road. Okay, so this is option 1. Let's take a look at option 2. The sound of cars and yellow cabs honking permeates the air of Times Square in New York City. The blinding lights shine brighter than diamonds, giving life to the city. Though it is late, people continue roaming the streets. As they say, the city never sleeps. So can you see the difference between the two options? Okay, in case you are still wondering, what is so different about these two options? Well, let me explain it to you again. So for example, the first option, there's nothing really wrong with the first option. It's very accurate. It tells you what is going on, right? It basically tells you how things are like in this place, okay? Or it just states how things are like. But what is different about the second option is that it presents you with a vivid picture of how things are functioning in Times Square. So one is telling you what is happening. The second one is showing you how it is happening. And that is the key difference. The second one also engages the use of senses. So you have the yellow cabs, you have the honking, right? You have the bright lights that are compared to diamonds, and then you have the people roaming the streets, so you have movement there. And there is also a quote that is used, which is the city that never sleeps. So even if you don't see the picture, you don't see this picture, right? But you read option 2, you can actually imagine what it's like. And maybe the picture in your mind is even more vivid than the picture that you see on the screen. So another way to use the power of descriptive language is through the use of adjectives and of course giving concrete examples. This is a piece that was written by one of our former students, Hani, who has since graduated from the academy. And this piece also won an award in a local writing competition. Hani chose to write about her sister, who is seen in this picture. Now, the way that she wrote about her sister, I found was very, very impactful because it didn't sound like any common description. So let's take a look at what she did. Okay, I'll read it out to you. My outstanding sister. I admire my sister Shaza because she is very entertaining. She tries to console me every time I'm very sad. When my mother scolds me, my sister would make me happier than ever by giving me things for me to look forward to. She makes time for me no matter how busy she is, and she sometimes brings me to watch newly released movies. She was the one that convinced me to eat vegetables that are healthy and delicious. She's also a kind and generous mother to my nephew. I admire my sister's determination because during the fasting month when she was pregnant, she only missed one day of fasting. Here's an acrostic poem I wrote for her. Sister, let's go play. Yes, honey, I'm coming soon. Always trying to entertain me, zany and zestful is she, always loving towards my nephew. So within this short piece about the sister, you feel like you know Shaza even though you haven't really met her, right? And why do you feel this way, or why would the reader feel this way? It is because of the many, many different adjectives that Hani has used. So for example, you have entertaining, you have kind, generous, determined, zany, zestful, right? So all these adjectives, when she uses it, she also describes an example that can be used to justify these adjectives, which makes the piece very, very complete and very detailed. So this is one example of how you could use adjectives and descriptive language to describe your character. Now, I would like to bring up this very, very important point when you are trying to make your writing stand out. Okay, so I have marked many, many essays, compositions, stories in my lifetime as a teacher, and I cannot stress this enough. If you sound repetitive, it does hamper your ability to write persuasively. It does create a more negative impression in the reader's mind, right? And The basic reason is if you are repeating yourself, whether it is repeating sentences or repeating words or even your sentence structure, it is just not going to go down well with your audience. And this is because there are just too many ways and too many words in the English language for you to repeat yourself. So this is something that good writers really, really need to overcome. And I'm going to suggest some of the ways and also give you some of the examples of repetition that I have spotted in primary school compositions or primary school stories. And I would like you to, for this particular exercise, have a piece of paper and pen or pencil ready with you. Okay? So you can pause this video and get your paper and pen, and then you can come back and continue to watch the rest of the video. So as I mentioned, there are many, many different ways to overcome the problem of repetition. And the most basic way to do so will be to replace similar words with synonyms. If you're not sure what synonyms are, basically they are words that mean similar things or words that have the same meaning but are different. Okay, and where do you find synonyms? You can actually use a thesaurus. You don't have to have, a hard copy of a thesaurus. You can actually go online and there's an online thesaurus that you can use to look for these synonyms to avoid repetition. Okay, and another way to avoid repetition is to actually vary your sentence structures. So for example, if you're reading your story or if you're reading through a story that you have written and you find that you always start with she has, right? Every paragraph sounds the same or every sentence sounds the same. What you can do is you can shift the second part of your sentence and bring it to the front, and then you can replace the first part of your sentence and bring it to the second part of your sentence so that you just create more variety, and it also allows the reader to enjoy reading your piece more because you don't sound repetitive. So I hope that makes sense. Now let's talk a bit about replacing words or replacing phrases. Okay, so this is where we can do the exercise together. Now, some of you may be familiar with some of these repetitions. I am certainly very, very familiar with all of these. So what you can do is you can write down words to replace all these words or all these phrases with something else. Okay, so let's try it out. And then I will also be giving you some examples of how you can rephrase or paraphrase some of these words and some of these phrases as well. Okay, so pause your video, write down words that you can use to replace suddenly, once bitten, twice shy, that incident was etched in my mind, the sun is shining brightly, beads of perspiration, out of the blue, as quick as lightning, and as fast as a cheetah. Okay, when you're ready, you can resume the video. Okay, so here are some examples. Suddenly is a very common word, and it is very often used to start a sentence or start a paragraph, right? So instead of saying suddenly, many students also use out of the blue, but then out of the blue becomes very repetitive. So how can you use the word suddenly without sounding repetitive? You can actually replace it with without any prior warning, okay? Or I was caught off guard, which means something suddenly happened to you or the character, okay? Now, what about that incident was etched in my mind? So this is used a lot in conclusions, right? When you want to tell the readers about something memorable that has happened, and you say the incident was etched in my mind. But then many, many other students are also using this phrase. So how can you make yourself sound different? You can actually phrase it as such: nothing could ever erase the vivid memory from my being. Okay, so notice I don't use the word mine, I don't use the word etched, but I'm saying the same thing essentially, that it will not be removed from my mind. Okay, so if you don't want to use the word my being, you can also say from the deep recesses of my mind. So these are some ways to replace that incident was etched in my mind. Okay, let's move on to other examples. Okay, so this is a very famous one, beads of perspiration. Now, how do you replace that? But you want to show the same effect. Maybe you want to show that your character is very, very nervous. So you can say, perspiration lined her forehead and dripped uncontrollably down her face. So when you say this, the picture that is in your reader's minds would be, oh, she's really, really scared, or she's really nervous and she cannot control her emotions, right? And therefore we use uncontrollably. So that's the kind of effect that you want to create in your reader's mind. The next one is commonly used by many students, especially in the lower primary. The sun is shining brightly. So that's the way that they start. Every composition starts to sound the same. The sun is shining brightly, no matter what the story is. Now, there's nothing wrong with saying that the sun is shining brightly, but if you don't want to sound common, you can rephrase it and you can paraphrase it as, the magnificence of the sun's light was so powerful, it was almost blinding. So the readers not only get a picture of the sun shining brightly, but the readers also get the idea that the sun's rays were so strong. So these are two different effects that the readers can glean from your writing. I hope this helps with repetition.